Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial on how to beat Amity Airfield. Amity Airfield is a scenario in the challenging category of the base game of RCT2. The goal is to get at least 3000 guests and a park rating of at least 600 at the end of year 4. The map is completely flat, with the only terrain feature being some trees near the edge of the map. You start out with a huge area of path and some scenery that is the airfield that this scenario is named after. The ride selection for this scenario is quite good. You start out with some transport rides, a few decent gentle rides, some okay coaster types, 2 good thrill rides and more than enough stalls. This is the best ride selection we have seen so far in this tutorial series. The coaster types are on the more uncommon side and are a bit more difficult to work with than the ones like the looping coaster and wooden coaster, but they're still quite decent. With research you can unlock some great extra coaster types and thrill rides, so it's definitely worth putting research to maximum funding and to coasters and thrill rides only. The second coaster type you unlock is the vertical drop coaster, which is really easy to work with, so to make sure that you get that one quickly, you could put the research to coasters only until you get it. The first thing you want to do in this scenario is get rid of the entire airfield, which will give you almost 15,000 euros. This may take a while in Vanilla and Classic since you don't have the path deletion tool that you have in RCT2, but it is still very much worth it. When we have just a little bit of path left, we open the park and we can start building. The first thing that we want to build is a couple of squares of path that have a size of something like 12 by 12 tiles. The exact size doesn't really matter and they don't have to be exact squares or rectangles, but having them as squares is the easiest to manage and a great strategy to start out with if you're new to the game. Once you get better at the game, you can start to move away from these systematic approaches and build more freely. 4 of these path squares is enough at the start. We can expand later when we need to. Now we want to build some flat rides inside the squares to get the park going. Be sure to either have the exits connect to the path directly or have the exit path only be a few tiles long. Also make sure that the queue lines all connect to the squares of path. For now, 1 flat ride in each square will do. Make sure that all your rides are on 10-minute inspection intervals, as that way they break down a lot less often. Before we build our first coaster, we want to make sure that the park rating stays high and make the park a bit future-proof. The first thing that we are going to build is some stalls. A drink stall, a food stall, an information kiosk and a toilet are all very important to have. It doesn't really matter where you place them, but I like to place them in the middle. Additional stalls like the balloon stall to make some extra money and the cash machine to prevent guests that run out of money to leave the park are also a good idea. You also want to raise the price of your umbrellas to the maximum price of 20 euros, as guests will pay anything for umbrellas when it rains. So that will make you a lot of money once the weather gets bad. The next thing that you want to do is place plenty of benches and bins on the path. Benches allow guests to sit down and lower their nausea levels, and bins will keep the path clean from litter. You can never have too many of either of these, so go nuts when placing them. The last thing that we want to do before we build a coaster is hire some staff. It's a bit hard to say what the ideal number of handymen is for a park, but I think that 5 handymen for every 4 squares is a decent estimate at the start. Once your park gets a bit larger and you have plenty of money, you may want to add more to make sure that any vomit is cleaned up quicker. I usually start my parks with 2 mechanics and check every now and then if they are able to keep up. If you don't have any mechanics just walking around doing nothing, it's time to hire a few more. You could also adopt a more systematic approach and hire 1 mechanic for every 4 or every 5 rides. Now we can finally build our first coaster. This is where a lot of people make the mistake of building a huge coaster. They look cool, but they're incredibly inefficient. A small compact inverted coaster attracts the same number of guests as a large compact inverted coaster. As a rule of thumb, you should never spend more than 10,000 euros on a single coaster and preferably not more than 5,000. Since the available coaster types don't have a lot of cheap and compact pre-built designs available, it's the best to build your own. If you're not comfortable building your own coasters, the pre-built inverted hairpin coaster called Hawk's Nest is a nice and cheap coaster that fits within the 12 by 12 squares. If you're going for a larger pre-built coaster like the compact inverted coaster called El Condor, you can place it on the side and have a rectangle the size of 2 squares. In this tutorial I will only build my own custom coasters. That way you can copy them if you want some better designs than the pre-builds that come with the game. When we have built our first coaster, we can raise the entrance price. As a rule of thumb, you can charge about 10 euros per coaster and about 3 euros per flat ride. So for this park with 1 coaster and 4 flat rides, we can charge about 20 euros. You should raise the entrance price when you build more rides, but be careful to not raise it above the minimum amount of money that guests can spawn with. In this scenario, that is 45 euros. This means that if you build 2 more coasters and 1 more flat ride, you're already at the maximum entrance price of 45 euros. Before we start expanding the park, we need to talk about one more thing, which is advertising. If you don't already use advertising, you're missing out on a lot of guests in your parks. Advertising is so strong that if you constantly run all ad campaigns, you can get more than 4,000 guests in a single year in some parks. It is quite expensive to do this, but it's definitely worth it. You can buy ads for up to 6 weeks or even 12 weeks if you have open RCT2, but you get the most out of your money if you buy the 2-week ones, as then you can get up to a whole week for free every time you buy a campaign. If you want to know why this happens and how exactly it works, click the card on the top right of the screen. Now that we have discussed every aspect of building your park and managing it, it's time to expand it. If you run out of money, don't be afraid to take out a loan, as using that money to build new rides is a much better way of spending the money than paying back your loan. If you have no money left and your loan is maxed out, you should be able to get some extra money simply by waiting for some more guests to come into the park. You can also add photo sessions to your rides for some extra money. I usually charge 3 euros for them. Building extra stalls that sell things like t-shirts and hats can also make a little bit of money, but you should mainly focus on getting as many guests as possible, as that is by far your largest source of income. Speaking about stalls, as you expand your path layout, you should build some more food and drink stalls, info kiosks and toilets around the park, so that guests never have to walk super far to get to a shop. Also, don't forget to build plenty of benches and bins on any new path that you build. When you're building rides, be careful to not build in the places where the new paths are going to be when you need to expand. Locking yourself in can result in having to build complicated path layouts that guests can more easily get lost in. While you're expanding your park, you should keep an eye on the park rating. If it's above 800, you're good. But once it gets below that, it's a good idea to look for the reason that your park rating is dropping. You can check what your guests are thinking by opening the guests window and setting it to the thoughts of all your guests. If something is wrong, it's likely that there'll be a lot of guests complaining about it. One reason could be that there's a lot of vomit or litter in your park. If it's really concentrated, like at the exit of a coaster with a high nausea rating, it might be a good idea to zone one handyman to that specific area. If it's more spread out, it is a good idea to just hire some more handymen. Also, don't forget to hire more mechanics and handymen in general when you are building more rides and paths. The issue can also be that some guests are lost. The reason that we are building these squares of path is to prevent that from happening. But it could still happen if you forgot to connect an exit path to the main path or something like that. In that case, fixing that should be the end of it. Vandalism can also be an issue, although it is never a root issue. If you have a lot of vandalism, it is likely caused by something like dirty path or something else that brings down the guest happiness, like overcrowding. The best way to fix this is to first repair the vandalism and then start looking for another cause that lowers your park rating. The last common cause is overcrowding. If a lot of guests are complaining about overcrowding, building some extra path squares should fix that. You can also build longer queue lines to store extra guests there. That is pretty much everything there is to it. If you follow this guide, you should reach 3000 guests well before the deadline. The most important things are to keep your park rating high and to never stop advertising and building. As long as you keep building, more guests will come in, which will give you more money for even more rides. Here is my finished park. As you can see, I easily passed the goal and I was able to build a huge park consisting of many coasters and many flat rides. If you want to take a closer look at it, the save file is in the description. If you are still having trouble with the scenario despite following this guide, don't hesitate to ask me about it on Twitter or on Discord. I will happily take a look at your park to see what's wrong. That was it for this tutorial. If you want a tutorial for any scenario that wasn't in my top 5 hardest scenarios video, let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.